There's a moment, and most people never talk about it because it sounds too small to matter, when something wild looks at you and decides whether you're worth trusting. Not whether you're dangerous, not whether you're kind, just worth it. I've seen men try to break animals with ropes, with hunger, with isolation. I've seen animals survive all of it and come out the other side with nothing left in their eyes. Not hate, not fear, just gone, like the part of them that might have reached toward something warm had finally given up and gone quiet. Cisco was supposed to be one of those. 14 hands of raw stubbornness, scarred along the jaw, ear half torn from something nobody wanted to explain. The traders who sold him called him unmanageable. The man before that had called him dangerous. The man before that had apparently just walked away one morning and never come back, which, depending on how you looked at it, was either an act of cowardice or the most honest thing anyone had ever done for that donkey. He'd bitten 2 men at Harlan Pruitt's ranch, put a third in the dirt so hard they thought his collarbone was gone. A boy from the reservation had come out on a dare and left with 3 less buttons on his shirt, and a story that grew larger every time he told it. They called Cisco the meanest donkey alive. And then Tom Ledger arrived. Tom wasn't anything special to look at, lean in the way of men who don't eat enough and work too much. Quiet in the way that had nothing to do with shyness, more like someone who'd spent so long listening to wind and horses that human noise just didn't register the same way anymore. He didn't carry a rope the first day, didn't carry anything, actually. He just walked to the fence, folded his arms on the top rail, and looked. What happened between that man and that donkey over the next 6 weeks changed how I understood both of them. And if I'm being truthful, and I'm trying to be, these days, in a way I wasn't always, it changed something in me too. The fence between them. I keep a journal. Not because I'm a writer, God knows I'm not, but because my grandmother told me once that a man who doesn't write things down forgets what he lived and starts confusing it with what he only imagined. She was a hard woman with a soft rule. Put the real things on paper before they slip. So I write, in the margins of receipts, on the back of torn feed bags, in a small leather notebook that's held together now with baling wire and genuine stubbornness. My name is Elias Dunn, and I have worked Harlan Pruitt's property for going on 11 years, which means I have seen most things worth seeing out here in the high desert country between the Rio Hondo and the Sacramento foothills. But I had not seen anything like Tom Ledger and Cisco. Not before, not since. Let me start with Cisco, because to understand what Tom did, you first have to understand what Tom walked into. The donkey arrived in late March on the back of a flatbed wagon, legs hobbled, eyes wild in a way that wasn't fear or wasn't only fear. There was something architectural about Cisco's wildness, like it had been built up over years, brick by careful brick, until it was load-bearing. You could see it in the way he held his head, not high like a horse showing off, but low and forward like something bracing. He was gray-brown, the color of creek mud in autumn, with a stripe of darker fur running from the back of his neck down his spine. His left ear had a notch torn out of it, old scar, healed clean but ugly. His jawline carried a ridge of raised tissue where something had caught him once, maybe a rope, maybe something worse. He weighed somewhere around 500 pounds. He was, by every visible measure, a tough, damaged, self-contained animal who had arrived at his current state through a long education in disappointment. He bit Miguel within 40 minutes of arriving. Miguel is our best hand with horses, patient, easy, never raises his voice. He'd approach Cisco from the side the way you're supposed to, slow and angled, letting the animal see him. Cisco let him get close enough to feel hopeful. Then he turned and caught Miguel's forearm so fast neither of us saw it coming. Miguel made a sound I'd never heard from him, sharp and short, more surprise than pain, and stepped back fast. Cisco stood absolutely still and watched him with those dark, flat eyes. Not angry, not panicked, just certain. "Get out," Harlan said, and we did. Over the next 3 weeks, Cisco established what I can only call a perimeter. 8 feet from his fence line, that was the limit. Anything inside that got teeth. The first man, a day laborer named Curtis, didn't believe us. He believed us after. The second attempt was by Harlan himself, who carried 30 years of experience and a stubborn streak that rivaled the donkey's. And he got within 4 feet before Cisco moved so fast and so deliberately that Harlan later said it didn't feel like an animal reacting. It felt like a decision. The third incident was the boy from the nearby Mescalero Apache community, maybe 15, riding on a dare from his cousins, who watched from horseback 20 yards out and looked appropriately nervous. He came at Cisco from the fence with his arm out and got the shirt button story for his trouble. He walked back to his cousins laughing it off, but I was close enough to see his hands shaking on his reins. Harlan talked about selling Cisco twice, butcher's price maybe, or giving him back to whoever had given him to the man who'd walked away. Neither solution sat right with Harlan, who had a rule about animals that had been failed by humans. He called it the ledger of owed chances, which is also where I thought Tom Ledger had gotten his name, the first time Harlan mentioned him. Calling a man named Ledger, Harlan told me one evening, not looking up from his dinner. Says he works with difficult animals, not a trainer, not a breaker, won't tell me what he is. Tucker Walsh out of Lincoln County vouches for him. Tucker Walsh had rebuilt his cattle operation after a fire that would have ended most men. If Tucker vouched for someone, that carried weight. Tom Ledger arrived on a Thursday morning in late April. He came in a truck that sounded like it had been repaired with decisions rather than parts. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, I thought, though he was one of those men whose age was hard to read, the sun having worked on his face in a way that could have meant 35 or 55 with equal confidence. He was lean without being thin. Brown hair mostly, a jaw that looked like it had been set and reset after breaking. He shook Harlan's hand and mine with the same economy, firm, brief, done. "Can I see him?" he said, and that was essentially the longest sentence he produced that first day. We walked him out to Cisco's pen. The donkey was standing at the far end, in the strip of morning shade, not looking at us. Tom stood at the fence for a long time without speaking. He had his arms folded on the top rail and his chin resting on them, and he just looked, the way you'd read something important, slowly, letting the sentences land. Cisco ignored him for about 10 minutes. Then, slowly, the donkey turned his head. They looked at each other across 40 feet of packed dirt. Nothing happened, that was the thing. In all the times we'd approached that pen, something had always happened. Tension, reaction, the slow calculation of distance and threat. But Tom just looked, and Cisco just looked back, and the air between them did something I didn't have a word for. "Okay," Tom said, and stepped back from the fence. "That's it," Harlan said. "For today." Tom looked at Harlan with an expression that wasn't quite patience and wasn't quite apology. "You push a thing that's been pushed too hard, you just teach it that push is all there is." He walked back to his truck, pulled a canvas bag out of the cab, and asked where he'd be sleeping. The next 5 days followed the same shape. Morning, Tom at the fence, 40 minutes, sometimes an hour. No rope, no halter, no food offered through the rails. Just presence. I watched from a distance, first out of professional curiosity, then out of something I'm more embarrassed to name. I started carrying my journal out there, sitting on an upturned bucket behind the water trough where I could observe without Tom knowing or Cisco caring. What I recorded in those days sounds, reading it back now, almost boring, but it wasn't. Day 2, Cisco stood at his usual far end but kept his head turned toward Tom. Before, with the rest of us, he'd either faced us directly, frontal, confrontational, or turned entirely away. The sideways attention was new. Day 3, Cisco walked toward the center of the pen, not toward Tom, just toward the middle. He stood there for a while like he was considering something, then he went back. Day 4, Tom started talking. Quiet enough that I couldn't make out words, just the rhythm, low, unbroken, no rise in it, no questions, no commands. The cadence of someone narrating a walk. Cisco's ears moved, not toward Tom exactly, but they moved. Day 5, rain. Tom went out anyway in an old canvas jacket that was the color of bad decisions and stood at the fence in the drizzle. Cisco stood under his small overhang roof, and they regarded each other through the weather. When Tom came back in, Harlan's wife, Della, handed him a towel and asked what he thought he was doing. "Getting rained on," Tom said. "You know what I mean." He considered this, dried his face with the towel, handed it back. "Letting him see I'm still there when it's uncomfortable. That matters more than when it isn't." Della looked at him for a moment. She was a woman who had been doing her own quiet version of that for 32 years with Harlan, and I think she recognized something in the description. She didn't say anything else. Day 6 was a Saturday, and I happened to be close, only 15 feet from the fence, when Tom arrived. He did his usual lean-on-the-rail posture, and Cisco, without any of the gradual middle-of-the-pen maneuvering, walked to within 12 feet of the fence. 12 feet, the closest that animal had been to a human being since arriving without intending harm. Tom didn't move, didn't change his breathing as far as I could see. He just let the reduction in distance exist without marking it, without making it into anything that needed a response. Cisco stood there, ears fully forward now, nostrils working. Then he took 2 more steps. 10 feet. He stopped there, looked at Tom. Tom looked back. Then Cisco turned and walked back to his shade strip as if nothing had happened. Tom watched him go. I heard him make a sound, very low, almost inaudible. It took me a second to identify it. He'd exhaled, a long-held breath finally let go. He hadn't been as still as he'd looked. He'd been holding something very carefully, like a man crossing a frozen creek, and he'd been doing it for days. I wrote that down. Then I sat there for a while longer than I needed to, not writing anything, just thinking about what it cost to be patient with something that had every reason to hurt you. About how that wasn't stillness at all. That was a kind of work most people never see because it leaves no visible mark. There's a man at the Mescalero camp, an elder named Delche, who comes through Harlan's area twice a year trading horses and sometimes mules. He'd been here 3 weeks before Tom arrived and had taken one look at Cisco and said something in Apache that one of the younger men with him translated, loosely, as, he has decided that pain and arrival are the same event. I wrote that down too. I was starting to think he was right, and starting to wonder what it would take, what specific human patience it would take, to teach an animal that the 2 things could be different. The break I hadn't expected came on a Wednesday, 9 days in. Tom had left his jacket on the top fence rail, just draped over it, forgotten or left deliberately. I never asked. He'd gone back to the barn for something. Cisco was at center pen, which was his new default, as if he'd quietly renegotiated his own terms with the open space around him. The donkey walked to the fence. He stood in front of the jacket for a long moment, nose working. Then he touched it. Just his muzzle, very lightly, the way an animal checks something it's decided might be safe. Then he stood there, the jacket touching his face, and I realized something that should have been obvious but hit me hard anyway. The jacket smelled like Tom, and Cisco was choosing to be close to that smell. Not the man, not yet, but the idea of the man. He stood there for almost a full minute. Then he stepped back, walked to the far end, and didn't look at the fence again that morning. When Tom came back and saw the jacket had been moved slightly along the rail, he didn't ask me what happened. He just looked at it for a moment with an expression I've been trying to describe accurately for a year and a half now, and still can't quite get right. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't relief. It was something more careful than both. The way you look at a door that's opened 1 inch, knowing that what matters now is not to reach for it. He put the jacket on slowly, without looking at the pen. In my notebook I wrote, he knows what it means. He's not going to ruin it by knowing out loud. And I sat on my bucket and listened to the wind coming off the Sacramento range, and thought about all the things, all the people maybe, I'd failed by making too much noise at the wrong moment, by marking the door before it was ready to open further. Some lessons come from books. Some come from watching a man in a bad jacket stand in the rain, until a donkey decides that approach and pain might not be the same thing after all. That Wednesday, I added 2 lines to my running note on Cisco that I've since crossed out and rewritten half a dozen times, trying to get them honest. He doesn't need to be gentle yet. He needs to believe there's a reason to try. The place where trust lives. There's a specific quality of silence that happens on a ranch in the hour before the light changes, when the animals are settled but the birds haven't started yet, and the air is cold enough that your breath shows but not cold enough that it hurts. It's my favorite silence, always has been. It's the silence that doesn't ask anything of you. Tom Ledger had been at Pruitt's for going on 3 weeks when I started running into him in that silence. He'd be out by the pen before I was. Not always watching Cisco, sometimes just standing there with coffee, looking at the mountains to the east. Sometimes crouched in the dirt near the fence, doing nothing I could identify in the particular way of men who have made peace with purposeful stillness. I asked him once, because I'd run out of polite reasons not to, "What are you thinking about, those times you're just standing there?" He took a moment, not to consider the question, I think, but to decide how honest he wanted to be this early in the morning with a man he barely knew. Sometimes him, he said, nodding at Cisco, who was 30 feet away doing his new routine of watching us while pretending not to. Sometimes nothing. Sometimes I'm thinking about the fact that the thing that broke him probably looked ordinary. I waited. The thing that made him like this, Tom said. It probably didn't feel like a big event from the outside, probably looked like just another day in the wrong hands, and he didn't get to say when it was enough. Nobody asked. He drank his coffee. I thought about what he meant and whether he was only talking about the donkey. How long were you in the wrong hands? I asked, which was either an honest question or an impolite one, and I couldn't decide which. Tom looked at me from the side. He had a way of looking at you where you felt assessed but not judged, the way you feel under a doctor's hand that knows what it's checking for. Long enough, he said. Not as long as him. We stood together in the silence for a while. Cisco had moved to 8 feet from the fence. That was new. By day 18, Cisco's perimeter had collapsed inward to something that would have been unrecognizable to the men who'd set up the original 8-foot rule. He would come to 6 feet, sometimes 5. He didn't come further, that invisible line still held, but the quality of the distance had changed. When we'd kept 8 feet, it had been a threat. Now 5 feet felt like something closer to negotiation. Tom hadn't introduced food yet. This surprised everyone, including Harlan, who'd been using grain and carrots as opening moves with difficult animals for 30 years. Food makes a thing trust your hand, Tom explained one evening at dinner, speaking in the careful economy of words that I was beginning to understand was not introversion but precision. But it doesn't make it trust you. There's a difference. One of them wears off. Harlan thought about this. He was not a man who changed his methods easily, but he had a quality I've always admired in him. He could sit with a new idea without immediately needing to defeat it. So what are you building instead? Harlan asked. Predictability, Tom said. He needs to know that my being there doesn't cost him anything, that I arrive and nothing bad follows, that I leave and nothing bad follows. That the world is the same world it was before I came, except I was in it, and he paused, seemed to reconsider, then went ahead. I kept my word. Whatever I was signaling I'd do, I did. Whatever I said I wouldn't, I didn't. Della was at the counter behind them, not turning around, but I saw her stop, moving for a moment. How long does that take? Harlan said. Tom looked at his plate. Depends how badly it was broken. Day 22. I know the exact date because I wrote it at the top of the page in my notebook and underlined it twice, which is not something I do, but it felt like the sort of thing you needed to be able to find again. Tom was at the fence at his usual morning time. Cisco was in the middle of the pen, doing his standing and considering thing. Normal morning, nothing visible building. Then Tom put his hand through the fence rails. Not reaching, not grabbing. Just rested it on the bottom rail, knuckles up, fingers loose, the way you'd put your hand down on a table if you were waiting for something and trying not to look impatient. Cisco looked at the hand. The hand didn't do anything. 5 minutes passed. I was very aware of my own breathing and tried to make less of it. Cisco walked to 4 feet, the line he'd never crossed. He stopped. He looked at the hand with his head low, nostrils doing their careful, data-collecting work. His left ear, the notched one, was canted forward. The right was moving, tracking sounds behind him. He was splitting his attention, and that felt important. Like part of him was still running the old protocol, checking exits, running odds. He took another step. 3 feet. His nose was working hard now. Tom's hand still wasn't doing anything. It was just there, present, consistent, not reaching, not retreating. Keeping its word, I thought, doing exactly what it said it would. Cisco took the last step. He put his muzzle 6 inches from Tom's hand, stopped, breathed, then he touched his nose to Tom's knuckles. 1 second, maybe 2. Then he backed up 3 steps, stopped, looked at Tom. Tom's hand hadn't moved. Tom's face hadn't moved. But I was watching him from the side and I could see the line of his jaw, the way it had been set tight for the last 22 days, go soft. Just slightly, just enough. It lasted a breath, and then he had his face back. Cisco looked at him for another long moment. Then he turned, walked to his favorite far corner shade strip and lay down, which I had never seen him do in the presence of a human being. Tom stood at the fence for another few minutes. Then he drew his hand back through the rails, straightened up, and walked back toward the barn. I sat on my bucket and couldn't write anything for almost 10 minutes. I just looked at the donkey lying in his shade and the hand-shaped empty space in the fence rails and thought about what I'd just watched. I'd watched a creature decide that the cost of trust was worth paying again. After everything, after the jaw scar and the torn ear and the men who turned it into a story about how mean a donkey could be. After years, probably, of arriving somewhere and finding that arrival and pain were, as Delche had said, the same event. After all of that, something had shifted. Not broken, not surrendered, shifted, which is a different thing entirely. Surrender is an ending. A shift is a decision made deliberately at considerable personal cost by something that has survived long enough to still have a self to risk. I wrote that down, crossed it out, wrote it again, kept it this time. The next few days moved differently. Once an animal crosses a threshold like that, it doesn't always mean the work is done. Usually it means you've just found out what the real work is. Tom seemed to know this. He didn't come to the fence the next morning with his hand already out, pushing on the new ground. He went back to the rail lean, the quiet look, the coffee. I saw Cisco watch for the hand. He came to 4 feet and looked at where the hand had been. Tom didn't give it to him. I almost said something, almost walked over and mentioned that the donkey was looking for the hand. But I didn't because I'm not stupid, and also because something told me Tom already knew. Day 24, the hand went back through the rails. Cisco came to it in under 2 minutes. Touched it, held the contact longer this time, maybe 5 seconds. Then backed up his usual 3 steps and stood there looking, but something was different in how he was looking. The day before, the backward steps had been a retreat. Today they felt like assessment, like he was checking whether what had just happened was still true now that some distance was between them. Tom waited. Cisco came forward again. This time he didn't touch the hand. He came to 8 inches away and breathed on it. Long, slow, equine exhalations that Tom let come without pulling away or tilting his hand or doing anything, except continuing to exist quietly in this new version of a relationship. On the way back to the barn, Tom stopped beside me. He'd started doing this occasionally, pausing where I was, not always talking, just including me in his orbit in the way of people who have decided you're safe to have nearby. He's testing whether it's still real, Tom said without me asking. Is that what that was? He came back, checked whether my hand still did the same thing. It did, now he's filing that. He looked back at the pen. Filing it takes a while, he's got a lot of contradictory information to account for. From before. I thought about the things people carry that they have to refile every time something genuine happens. The contradictory information. The old data that says this is what touch means, this is what approach means. The way new evidence has to stack up before it can overwrite the older, deeper records. How long did it take you? I asked, same impolite question as before. He was quiet for a long moment, a real quiet, not an evasive one. Still filing some of it, he said. He walked to the barn. I sat with that for the rest of the morning. The weight of a face in your hand. Delche came through on a Friday, 5 weeks and 2 days into Tom Ledger's time at Prout's. He arrived as he always did, unhurried, with 2 younger men, a string of horses, and the particular dignity of a person who has reached an age where they've stopped performing patience and simply live inside it. He shook Harlan's hand, mine, nodded at Tom, and asked to see the horses we had for trade. He found Cisco instead. Not exactly found. He walked the property in his usual thorough way and stopped at Cisco's pen. The donkey was at 6 feet from the fence rail, which was now his habit when Tom was present and his testing spot when Tom wasn't, like he was holding the territory of that new distance, keeping it warm. Delche stood at the fence for several minutes without speaking. His 2 companions, younger men named Hector and Cal, hung back with the ease of people who'd seen the elder stop and look at things before, and had learned to let the looking finish in its own time. Tom came out of the barn and stopped when he saw Delche at the pen. He read the situation quickly. He was good at that, at not inserting himself into a moment that didn't need him, and came to stand with me instead, a few yards back. Delche spoke quietly to Cisco. Apache, I assumed, though I only caught the cadence, not the meaning. low and even with the same unquestioning quality that Tom's voice had. I looked at Tom from the side, and he was listening with an expression of professional recognition. "He's doing what you do," I said quietly. "Yes," Tom's voice was just above a murmur. "He's been doing it longer." After a while, Delche turned and looked at Tom. He walked over, and the two men did a thing I hadn't seen before. Delche looked at Tom's hands for a moment, then at his face, then extended his own hand for the shake. It felt less like a greeting and more like a form of confirmation. "He's close now," Delche said in English that was perfectly clear and precise. "How long?" "Few more days, maybe," Tom said. "He's filing things." Delche nodded as if that was exactly the right word. "We had a horse years back, 14 months before he would accept a hand on his neck." He paused. "People said we were wasting time. I told them the horse was working very hard." Tom looked at him. "The patience isn't the virtue," Delche continued. "The patience is just the shape the work happens to need. The virtue is deciding the work is worth it." Tom said nothing, but something moved in his face, quick, deep, the kind of thing that's over before you can name it. They stood together in the morning light and watched Cisco, who was watching all of us with those dark, level eyes, ears forward, nose doing its constant, quiet work. The morning Tom touched Cisco's face was a Tuesday. Week 6. I know this not because of my notebook, but because Harlan had mentioned the date that morning at breakfast, Della's birthday, though nobody but me seemed to have caught that detail, which tells you something about 32 years of marriage, and another something about how small, important things go unregistered. The day was clear and cool, the kind of New Mexico morning where the light comes in at angles that make everything look a little more deliberate than usual. I was at my bucket by 7. Tom was already at the fence. Cisco came to the fence within minutes of Tom arriving. This had been their rhythm for 6 days now, the donkey crossing the space quickly, with a directness that still looked startling given what it had taken to get here. He'd come to 2.5 feet. He'd let Tom's hand rest at the bottom of the fence rail, and he'd touched it, held the contact, smelled it, backed up, returned. Over and over, each session adding nothing new in terms of action, but adding something invisible in terms of accumulation. Filing. That Tuesday, Tom's hand was at the rail as always. Cisco came to it as always, made contact, started to back up. And Tom said, very quietly, one word I couldn't hear. Cisco stopped. Tom turned his hand over slowly, palm up, nothing in it, just open. Cisco looked at the open palm. He took one step back toward the fence, looked at it again. Tom waited. The donkey came to 18 inches from the fence. He stretched his neck, longer than I'd seen, his whole neck extending, that scar-ridged jaw reaching, and put his nose into Tom's palm. Tom let it be there. Then slowly enough that I was aware of every second of it, Tom turned his hand and curved it upward, and his palm came to rest against the side of Cisco's face. The donkey went absolutely still. Not the stillness of threat or fear, the stillness of something being received. His eyes half closed, not the dull closing of an animal shutting down, but the softer closing of something that has stopped bracing. Tom's hand was on his face, not gripping, not directing, just there, the way you'd hold a thing you were afraid of losing. Cisco breathed, a long, audible exhale through his nose, his sides dropping, then another. Tom's own shoulders dropped. I hadn't realized how high he'd been holding them until they weren't anymore. They stayed like that for, I want to say, a minute, but I was not tracking time well. I was sitting very still on my bucket and trying not to exist too loudly in case existing disrupted anything. Then Tom's other hand came through the rails, moving even slower, and rested against the other side of Cisco's face. And the donkey stood there, held gently between those two hands, eyes soft, body quiet, that torn ear canted forward, and I had to look away, not because it was overwhelming, though it was, because it felt private. The way certain things that happen in the open are still private, still between the people or the beings there between, and witnesses have the obligation to look at the horizon for a moment. I looked at the Sacramento foothills, the light on them, the way the high desert morning was the color of old brass and promise. When I looked back, Tom had drawn his hands back through the fence. Cisco stood at the fence, head slightly lowered, not moving. Tom put his forehead against the top fence rail for a moment, just rested it there, eyes closed, When I told Delche about it, he was still on the property. He'd stayed 2 extra days, which was unusual enough that Harlan had noticed. The elder listened to the whole account without interrupting. Then he said, "And how did the man look?" I thought about it, about the forehead on the rail. "Like he'd put something down," I said, "something he'd been carrying for a while." Delche nodded slowly. The work was never only for the donkey. I sat with that for the rest of the afternoon. I think I'm still sitting with it. In the weeks after, things moved at a pace that felt, after everything, almost anticlimactic, and then I understood that was the point. Tom walked into the pen on day 41. Just opened the gate and went in, no ceremony, no backup plan visible, just himself and the same economy of movement he'd been practicing for 41 days. Cisco turned to face him from the far corner. Tom stopped just inside the gate. Cisco looked at him. Tom put his hands in his jacket pockets. Cisco walked toward him. He walked all the way to 3 feet. He stopped and looked at Tom's jacket pockets, looking, I realized, for the hands that had been the consistent point of contact. Tom understood this and drew one hand out slowly and held it open at his side. Cisco put his nose to it. Then he stepped forward and Tom raised his hand, and it was on the side of Cisco's face again, but this time inside the pen, this time without the fence between them, and this time Cisco leaned into it. Slightly, barely visibly. But he leaned. I wrote 4 words in my journal and stopped. He leaned into it. That's the whole of what happened, in the way the whole of what happened fits into 4 words. The rest of it, the 6 weeks, the rain, the hand in the fence rail, the forehead on the top beam, the way Tom's shoulders had been held too high for too long, all of that was the context that made those 4 words mean anything. And the 4 words were the thing that made the 6 weeks worth it. Tom left Pruitt's on a Thursday morning in late June. He didn't make a production of it. His truck, still sounding like it was held together by willpower and past promises, was loaded by 7. He shook Harlan's hand and mine. Della packed him food for the road without being asked, and he thanked her with more genuine feeling than he'd shown about most things. He went to Cisco's pen last. The donkey was at the fence when he got there, which felt like something. Like he'd heard or sensed the packing up. Tom stood at the fence. Cisco was already at 2 feet. Tom put his hand through the rails one last time. Cisco pressed into it. Not the touch-hand step-back of the early weeks. A press. The donkey's face against Tom's palm, weight behind it, deliberate. Tom held it for a long time. He said something very quiet. I was too far away and I didn't move closer. That was between them. When he drew his hand back, Cisco stood at the fence and watched him walk to his truck. He stood there as the engine turned over twice, then caught. He stood there as the truck pulled out toward the road. I don't know when he stopped watching. I'd gone back to work. But when I came by the pen an hour later, Cisco was in his far shade strip. His eyes were open. His ears were forward. He was facing the direction the truck had gone. He let Miguel touch him a week later. Not right away, not without testing. Miguel approached from the side, gave him time, let Cisco read the information off his hand, and didn't push past what was offered. It took 3 tries across 3 mornings. The 3rd morning, Cisco let him make full contact with his jaw. Miguel came to find me after. He's not a man who makes a lot of his emotions. He has the practical approach to feeling that comes from hard work and limited time, but he stood beside me and said, quietly, "He's different." "Tom did something," I said. "What did he do, exactly?" I thought about it. I thought about the rain, the jacket left on the rail, the 40 days of showing up without demanding anything, the hand in the fence, the word about filing, the forehead on the beam. "He kept his word," I said, "over and over until there was enough of it stacked up to matter." Miguel considered this in the way he considers most things, thoroughly, without rushing to a conclusion. "Sounds simple," he said. "It wasn't." "No," he agreed, "it never is." Delche, in the last morning before he left, had asked me something I've been turning over ever since. We were standing at the fence watching Cisco, who was at his fence-facing default now, close, watchful, curious rather than braced. "When a thing has been broken by people," Delche said, "and a person heals it, what changes in the person?" I didn't know how to answer, so I said so. "Something always does," he said. The question is whether they know it. The donkey knows what changed in him. He felt it. People, he smiled, barely, the economy of a man who spends his expressions carefully. People often don't notice until much later. I thought about Tom's forehead on the rail, the exhale. I thought about the question I'd asked twice, how long were you in the wrong hands? And the answer, still filing some of it. I thought about what it might feel like to do the thing you have to do for someone else and discover, somewhere inside it, that you were doing it for yourself too. Not instead of, too. The way love works sometimes. The way healing works, maybe, when you're lucky enough to find work that asks it of you without naming it. Cisco stood at the fence, his torn ear turned toward something I couldn't hear. His jaw, the scarred one, the ridge of old rope or old cruelty or old whatever it was, caught the morning light and threw no shadow. He leaned into it. I'd written 4 words. All of it in 4 words, and everything I couldn't quite get on paper around them. I put my journal in my jacket pocket. I had work to do. The ranch didn't pause for revelation, which was, honestly, one of the things I'd always loved about it. Behind me, as I walked toward the barn, I heard Cisco move. Hooves on the packed dirt, unhurried.